So hello guys, this is Charlie Wall here, joined by my lovely friend Ali Scott. So welcome, Ali.
Hello, hello.
And this is the third interview, the third conversation that I'm having around the theme of Nature for Mental Health Awareness Week, recording this in May 2021. And Ali, I ask everyone about this, and I usually start the podcast with this. My podcast is called Courage, Dear Heart, and I'd love to know what the word courage means for you.
Sure. The word courage comes from heart, I think, in the first place.
It
And I like
does.
courage, dear heart, how that kind of goes together as well. For me, I suppose something that always sticks in my mind is that whole speak your truth, even if your voice shakes kind of thing.
I love that, Ali.
I love that so much. And that has taken me through so many difficult conversations in my life. And it is that sense of, I think it's that sense of really being true to your heart and doing what, doing and saying what is true and right for you, maybe rather than what is easy or comfortable or safe or, that kind of thing. And I suppose it's a bit Brené Brown, probably. I think she talks about wholehearted living.
Yeah.
In that sense of like really living from your heart. And I think a lot of the time we tend to either numb out or run away from the truth, our truth. So I think for me, it's definitely kind of getting back in touch with our feelings, not being scared of them, being open-hearted enough to share what's kind of really going on. I think it's less about the kind of hero stuff and more about that sort of gentle courage from within for me.
What a beautiful answer. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed listening to the answers this week. And I love the way you I think that ties in very nicely with the subject of the topic for our talk today, which is around our body's natural wisdom, because you use the word truth telling and numbing out. Of course, I know you probably know that when we don't tell our truth, we can really feel that in our body. So tell me a little bit about like what you understand about the body's wisdom.
I feel like just leading on from that, what you just said there, I think we have actually become somehow, a lot of us anyway, quite disconnected from that feeling. So I think you're right. I think we absolutely know when we are kind of speaking our truth and what's right for us.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is that we don't, because of this whole idea that we can't handle our feelings and handle our bodily sensations, that I think is kind of unfortunately with us from quite early on in life now, we tend to not be in tune with that so much, maybe as we used to be, maybe as much as we could be. And so that uncomfortable feeling that we get when we know we're not really being true to ourselves, we don't like it. So then we just numb it out, or we drink, or we spend, or we whatever, whatever we do, whatever the thing we do is to distract away from that feeling or numb out from that feeling. But actually, I think that to me is really important, because the body is so wise. The body knows everything, but we are running from that intelligence, if you like, quite a lot of the time, quite innocently, really innocently, actually. But I think we haven't really grown up in that way where we are in tune with that wisdom. And I feel like possibly in tribal communities and other kind of communities, they have more of a sense of that. And there's things like the rites of passage when you go from childhood to adulthood and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
From where you go from and that's all supposed to be about going from this childlike state to this adult state where you are in touch and you are listening to your inner wisdom. We seem to kind of skip that part a little bit. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Well, that's definitely my experience, but I wonder if you could tell the listeners about your experience, your sort of visceral experience of how did you get to a place of knowing that there was a natural wisdom within your body?
Yeah, sure. I suppose I grew up, looking back now, as a child, we're always intuitively connected to our bodies. We're always like, we're very somatic. We feel everything as children, but we also feel everything. We're very dictated to by the adults around us. So we're kind of like feeling, but we're not sure if it's ours or whose it is. We're kind of very dictated to. And then I feel like for most of my life, I definitely lived very much in my head. I think I dissociated, like a lot of people do, from kind of feeling, intuition, and sometimes even from creativity with that. and kind of went up into my head in an attempt to make sense, to analyze, or to escape, I think. And these uncomfortable feelings that we have in our bodies, and that I had in my body, I didn't like it. I didn't trust it, didn't feel safe. So you kind of escape into the safety, relative safety of the head, if that makes any kind of sense. And then from there, we just lose touch. We're not attuned to those subtle kind of energy shifts. We're not attuned to what our body's trying to tell us. We're not attuned with it. We're not in line or in flow with our creativity, because that's very much a heart-centered thing rather than from the head. And so I think I realized probably, and also I got ill in my teens. I was physically unhealthy. I had skin stuff, I had digestive stuff. Everything just felt like it was all a bit not really going in the right direction. And I remember going to see a GP once about some of this stomach related stuff. And he tried to put me on a drug. And I don't know what happened, but just had this massive blinding realization, if you like, that that's not going to solve the problem. And I was only quite young at the time, and I didn't live my whole life from that place from that day forward, but it was a big realization that we're looking here at running around looking at symptoms, mental symptoms and physical symptoms, and we're not really listening to our bodies. We're not really looking at what the root cause is of any of it, and the wisdom that we have innately in there. So I just started realizing that I needed to listen to that a bit more. And it was difficult because well-meaning people will tell you what to do and try and give you things to stop feeling bad. But it was a journey of kind of almost unveiling the truth, if you like, and the root cause and the root truth, rather than trying to add a drug on top of it or add something else on top of it. And I think that was probably the starting point. So for me, the kind of physical and the emotional exploration of all this lovely stuff that you talk about and are involved in has been quite intertwined and interwoven, which is why probably talking about the body made sense for us.
Yeah.
It's been a real journey of mixing it all together somehow,
Yeah, which has been a great exploration, and one I'm still kind of exploring too.
Yeah.
So that was the sort of start for you. And what then happened in your life to begin this kind of co-creation with that body's wisdom?
I guess I realized that I started learning. I started studying, I started learning, I studied nutritional medicine. I really wanted to get hands on the kind of physical side of things. And I loved that and I really enjoyed it, but I still felt something was kind of lacking. So then I turned to the sort of more emotional and mental side of things and studied cognitive therapy and cognitive hypnotherapy and NLP and that kind of side of things. And then I was like, that's not quite got it all either. So then I kind of looked more spiritually, I guess. And so I moved into looking at around 3 principles and looking into non-duality and just really looking at, I guess, true nature, what I would call true nature. And true nature for me is something that is at the root of or lies beyond everything, physical, emotional, mental, all of it. And so I suppose that whole journey was littered with brilliant teachers and courses and amazing people, and just kind of tried to just learn as much as I could and understand as much as I could. And I suppose from there, I've almost taken bits out of all of that and woven them together into certainly something that makes sense for me and my clients, and something that makes sense at a deeper level for me too. So, and I think this idea with our bodies that we can't be stressed and relaxed at the same time. Like we can't be in fight or flight response and in rest or digest response at the same time. And that seems really obvious, but that was quite a revelation. And I think that is quite a revelation for people. And obviously, because of the way we live in our society and our pressures and our made up stories and all of the other stuff, we live a hell of a lot of our lives in the fight or flight response, in that kind of very challenging position for our bodies to live in. We are designed to live in that for short bursts. We end up living in it for a long time. And I think that, to me, has been such a pinnacle realization that we just really need to start feeling into that more and recognizing when that's happening. And we don't often. We keep going, or we just take more stimulants, or we just keep running, and we're drilled into us like the day nurse ads kind of vibe, where don't worry if you're not feeling great, just take some day nurse and crack on. You know,
Yes.
that kind of, I always talk about the day nurse, you know, thing. And it's that mentality, I think, isn't it, that we've just got to keep going, keep going, keep going. And, you know, our bodies are falling apart a lot of the time. You know, the list of chronic ailments now is so high compared to what it was 50 years ago even. And I think so much of that, I mean, there's lots of factors to it, but, you know, stress response is huge.
The stress response is something I talk about a lot in the work that I do, and for me too, I think I spent probably most of my life prior to coming across the principles that you alluded to earlier in flight or fright. You know, even whilst I was asleep, I was just
Yeah.
constantly on high alert. So you also kind of liken that to stress, and I just wonder for you, what was, because you mentioned studying nutrition and then studying NLP and cognitive, was it CBT
Yeah,
as
cognitive
well?
therapy and cognitive hypnotherapy. Yeah.
And then what at those points, like you'd studied and you were blessed with meeting a lot of teachers and gaining a lot of knowledge, but what was it about connecting the dots for you? What had you piece this all together in a way that had you live it, embody it?
Yeah, there's a difference, isn't there, between knowing it here and having it drop
Yeah,
down this
yeah.
kind of level. I think it's a really good question. And I think it was all about recognizing that we are actually, in many, many ways, so far removed from our true nature. And and we can talk about, there's all kinds of levels at which we could talk about that, but there was something in the recognition that our bodies, for example, are always trying to maintain homeostasis. We're always trying to, you know, if we're cold, our fingers will go numb. Our body's preparing to lose our fingers at the expense, you know, to keep the rest of the body alive, right?
Yeah.
And so these kind of things, our body is always trying to find its balance, find its balance. Even cancer, and it's controversial, but even cancer has been shown to be a way of the body trying to get rid of toxicity and lump it all together, you know, that kind of thing. So again, some of this stuff is quite kind of cutting edge or controversial in some ways, but most of the diseases of the body aren't really what we think they are. You know, they're an attempt by the body to keep maintaining health all the time, and we can see them as disease states. And I think the same can happen in the emotional kind of world as well. We see a lot of things as the body and the mind being wrong or defective, and I'm like, the more I started to see the body is never wrong. The body knows, the body is, look at all the things it does for us without us even having to think about it. So few of the body's processes and systems are under our conscious control. You know, that it's phenomenal, isn't it? You cut your finger, look what happens. We can never replicate that, no matter how much artificial intelligence we create, you know? And so I think on that level, and also on the emotional level, it became clear to me that the body and mind are always trying to find its level, find its balance, find its peace. And we tend to get in the way of that all the time. And if we stop getting in the way of it and doing all these doey things that kind of actually add to the stress and add to the fight or flight, and some stress is good and healthy, but not the chronic levels that we are in, then I think, you know, that sort of beyond and behind all of this stuff lies a place of peace. And that suddenly seemed obvious that was the source of wisdom, of joy, of health, I suppose, really. So that, yeah, I'm not sure if that answered the question or not. But that's what I came to see. And I think really from there, we do live in a world that is increasingly disconnected from nature. You know, we know this. We just do. If you compare us to any other animal, we are clearly the most disconnected species on the planet, which is not necessarily all bad. We've created amazing things like the ability for me and you to have this conversation over this technology. You know, so much brilliance has come from our creativity, but we are so far removed from the peace. Well, there's a poem called The Peace of Wild Things, which I love. And
Oh,
it's,
have you got it?
I'm going to find it.
Yeah, find it. Let's read it.
Actually, I'd love to read it because it's one of my favorites, and I should know it off by heart the amount of times I've okay, so it says, it's by Wendell Berry, And it says, when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought or grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. And I just makes me all goosebumpily. Because it's beautiful, isn't it? Really beautiful. And I think this is the thing. We have this ability to tax our lives with the forethought of grief. And animals just don't have that ability. They have conditioned responses, but they don't have the ability to construct the past, make up the past how it wasn't really, even remember the past mostly. And they don't have the same ability to project into the future and analyze. And I think although that's the thing that gives us great potential as humans, it also limits us in certain ways too.
Yeah, and so many ways I could go here.
Yeah.
So I think where I'm being called to go is the sort of stress response, the inflammatory response. You've sort of alluded to past thinking, future thinking as causing us to activate that stress response. So we're talking about the body's wisdom, and you've also mentioned that the body's always trying to bring us back to homeostasis, right? And I lived in that place of chronic stress for a long time, anxiety, PTSD. I had terrible problems with my skin and my stomach. So I wonder if you could maybe talk to, because I know you have this knowledge. I don't know if you've got this personally, this experience, but could you talk to the inflammatory response?
Yeah, sure. The inflammatory response is one of the biggest issues in health. And I know you know all about this. And I, very similarly to you, our stories are not, we know this, our stories weave in and out of each other in quite a lot of ways. But, and my stomach and skin were also like the real problem area, and emotion, panic attacks, severe anxiety, debilitating anxiety, you know, depersonalization and all that kind of stuff. And the inflammation can come from many forms. It can come from what we're ingesting, but that's physically and emotionally as well. So, you know, too much of the wrong kinds of foods can create inflammatory conditions in the gut. The gut and the brain are just linked in a way that people just didn't realize until fairly recently. We've always known subconsciously, and I'll explain why in a minute, but we, like scientists and doctors now, are linking completely the brain to the gut. And the gut is the second brain. I'd argue it's probably even the first brain sometimes, but, you know, and so, but inflammation can come. So it can come from alcohol, from junk food, from sugar, from anything we become intolerant to, you know, from pesticides, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're unfortunately having to deal with on a daily basis. But one of the biggest sources of inflammation is from stress. And, you know, anytime a body is in, I'm not going to go into big scientific detail, and I'm not a scientist, but anytime a body is under stress or is in this fight or flight response, we are creating inflammation in the body. And again, our bodies are really good at dealing with little bits of it. Like, we know this, like the whole, and I know you talk about this loads and you can talk about it much better than me, but the fight or flight response was a genuine response to a life or death situation, wasn't it? Like, you know, tiger is coming to eat me. I need to run, or I need to fight, or I need to play dead. You know, any one of these things I need to do, right? And then the tiger would either eat you or you'd be lucky and life would go on. And you wouldn't stay in that state the whole time, you know. And actually, quick sidetrack, but you know, the Minions, this is really random. I think the Minions are a perfect example of this, because they get on with stuff, life's really fun, then they have like some kind of crisis and they all step into gear and get all stressed, then the crisis goes away and they go back to being completely at peace again, and they're literally responding. It's so when I watch
moment by moment,
they're just being in the moment. And it's so, when I watched one of the, you know, Despicable Me films, I was really hit with that. I was like, this is brilliant. They're like the perfect example. They're not then thinking again, when's the next bomb going to come? They're just living it up, you know, until the next bomb comes, kind of thing. And so, you know, but we tend to, we don't do that anymore. You know, we see typical kind of example, but we see the driver cutting us up as the tiger.
Yeah.
You know, everything is a stress. Everything puts us into this fight or flight response, and we don't have any outlet for it. We don't actually have the run. We don't actually have the fight. We don't even shake. Like animals would naturally shake after some stressful experience, and in the shaking they signal to their body that the danger is gone. We don't do that. And that's why I think a lot of tribal communities and a lot of, you know, have shaking as part of their dancing and things like that, which is a whole nother conversation.
That's really interesting, actually, because I knew about the shaking thing, and I watched a couple of ducks the other day, and I watched them do it now.
Yeah.
And I've realised, well, I learned this a couple of years ago, but I'm finding myself really now watching that in nature, that happen, that shake off that we don't do. I think we freeze. I think a lot of us just freeze, and then carry on.
Yeah, and in that freezing, we haven't dealt with, or what's the word? We haven't processed that kind of.
It's just stuck in us. It's just stuck there.
And that you can feel that, can't you, viscerally, when you sort of talk about it. And also, I think we try and, if the child was shaking, we'd probably try and stop it innocently, again, well-meaningfully, but we'd probably try and stop the shaking. We'd there, calm down. You know, it's kind of, you know. And I know when I used to have panic attacks, I'd have panic attacks, and I wouldn't shake in the panic attack. When it was all done and I was kind of calm, my body would involuntarily start shaking, and people would think I was, and I'd be scared. I didn't realize that was brilliant, you know.
Yeah, and natural, the body's natural wisdom to do that.
Exactly. And so I would think, oh my God, something's wrong with me. I'm gonna, you know, whatever's happening. And so I'd try, and people would throw blankets on you and they try and stop it happening. And, you know, and I think we're just not attuned to that being natural. So I think in that we've lost this. Yeah. So we're faced with all these small stressors all the time that we're kind of seeing like a tiger, because we haven't got anywhere to process them. We're not able to jump out. Well, some people do jump out of their car and hit the other driver, but not normally. So we're not processing them in the way that our bodies were sort of designed to. And with that, I think comes a lot of it comes a lot of storing of emotion, but also comes a lot chronic stress. Chronic stress leads to chronic inflammation through lots of various scientific methods, which are too long and detailed to go into here. But this is a well-known thing. It's not just an alternative woo-woo theory. It's very scientifically documented. And inflammation just creates in the body a cascade, really, of hormonal changes, of all different kinds of neurotransmitter trait transformations. Like, it just creates, and it also basically knackers the gut. It creates essentially holes in the gut, and where the tight junctions of the gut are all like this, you know, inflammation makes them leaky. And so from that point, undigested food can go into the body, all kinds of different chemicals that shouldn't be flowing around go into the body. They make their way to their brain. The brain becomes inflamed. If your gut's inflamed, your brain is inflamed. Like, there's no way that's not happening. So the things are so linked. And it's why we know, when I was saying before, we've always subconsciously known, it's why we say the obvious things like my gut feeling, or I can't stomach that, or there's so many examples of language which are clues, because we've always sort of known on some level, you know, that's very connected. And so, you know, if you're anxious, your gut's going to be affected. If your gut's affected, you're going to be anxious. Often this has a big loop. And yes, of course, it's important to look at diet and anything that might be triggering reactions. But what's really important is to look at why we're responding so consistently with this. I call it the meerkat, you know, the kind of constantly on high alert, looking out for danger.
Yeah.
All the time. And a lot of it, I think, is about seeing that for what it is about shining a light on that, because a lot of people don't even realize that's how they're living. And if we don't realize it's how we're living, we can't even look at changing it, you know. And often the shining of the light on it, the explaining of it, the getting people to understand, you know, how we're reacting to everything, that's the starting point to allow us somehow to create a bit more of a gap between stimulus and response, And in that gap, and this is Viktor Frankl stuff, man's search for meaning, in that gap is where all the wisdom is, all the power is, all the intelligence is, and all the creativity is. So, you know, it's about that. And I think beyond that, it's about recognizing, and this is probably going more into principles territory and non-dual territory, recognizing that who we really are is always okay, is always safe, is always actually essentially at peace. And what we've done with all this innocent but ineffective stress is just add layers and layers and layers of stuff on top. So we're operating from a real place of kind of ego, and we have to have an ego, so that's fine, but we're operating out of a real egoic place, and we're forgetting our true nature. Our true nature isn't to be stressed all the time. You know, our true nature isn't to be ill all the time. So, yeah.
So a lot of my listeners and people watching this may be new. They won't understand potentially what the principles are. They may have heard non-duality. When you say that, you know, there's innate wisdom in the body, which I also believe in, but then you said we're always safe, we're always okay, which I also believe in. But I wonder if someone hearing that might be like, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
That's
it doesn't
not
feel
true.
like that. Yeah, and it doesn't feel like that a lot of the time. Yeah, and I really relate to that, because when I was having panic attacks, if someone said to me, "Don't worry, you're always safe," I'd probably, punch them or tell them to F off or whatever, because it certainly didn't feel like it at the time. And so for me, I think, and I don't really talk about the principles so much anymore as such, and I guess I never really did, but the whole learning and environment of that was key to my kind of understanding. And I suppose what really, and I'm not a non-dual teacher, and I'm not someone who would proclaim to be the best at speaking about this, but how I experience it is really that on a bigger level, we have this idea that we are this idea that sort of we're in charge or in control somehow. We can kind of get really involved in our lives, and if you really kind of look from a bigger level, everything's just happening, everything just is, everything's just going on, and we are essentially going to die. And it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but when that and that might not hit people like it hit me, but when it hit me with, so I'm going to die, everything I've ever thought is going to be completely meaningless, rendered meaningless in an instant. It's just not going to mean anything. And so all the stress I've had, all the judgments I've made, all the criticisms, all the self-hatred, all the negativity, all of it is just, none of it means anything. Like, it's all made up. And so that's a huge, huge thing to get your head around. And it's not something that you have to get your head around. But to me, that realization, even on that level, right, that we are going to die, this physical body of Ali will die. And so I kind of said, so what is the point of all this stuff that we're doing to ourselves all the time? You know, and that was a starting point. That's not going to be something that just makes you walk out of this conversation going, oh, everything's fine, you know, but that to me is something to think about, to explore, to just get curious about. You know, we've made up such a lot of meaning in our life, you know, and I suppose ultimately it's all related. I was going to say it's not related, but it is related. We are born into this world as pure potential. We are born into this. We don't know that we're not our mother. We think we are everything around us, because actually we kind of are. And so we think we don't, and it's only when we sort of start to recognize we are moving this hand that's floating across our face, and then someone gives us a name and that separates us off. And then we start to crawl around and someone slaps our hand and tells us not to touch that hot thing. And so we kind of, it's almost like we're this expanse of everything. And then life makes us contract. So every time we're told what we can and can't do, every time we're told how the world works, every time we're told society's laws, it sort of just shapes us. And it's not wrong. This has to happen in order for us to navigate life. But if you're born into a tribe in Africa, you'd have a different shaped ego than if you're born in London. You know, so because you're born into a different set of beliefs, a different set of constructs, but all the beliefs and all the constructs are all made up. They're all made up by someone at some point. They've been passed down and handed down. So none of them have any inherent actual truth or meaning. And that really blows my mind.
It blows my mind. I remember when I first kind of realized that, and I was like, yeah, I've been creating my stress from within and I didn't know. And a lot of that was other people's conditioning too.
Yeah.
No, I really feel the depth of that. Thank you for sharing it like that.
Well, I know it's cool, and it's just how I'm quite visual, so I see it a lot, and I can't always say it how I see it. But I remember being actually at a Three Principles conference when this realization kicked in, and I can't even remember who was speaking. That's how funny it is. But I just suddenly saw all of the government, and I've always had a bit of a dodgy relationship with government
Me
anyway.
too.
I think, yeah, natural rebel and all that, but that comes with part of this journey sometimes, doesn't it? I suddenly saw all of the kind of societal institutions like a house of cards just falling down. And not that I now live outside the law or have gone off grid or anything like that, but just to see the idea that none of it is actually true, was it helpful enough to me? I haven't gone and bought a yurt and grown my own vegetables, although I have got an allotment. But I had, it's more about seeing through the illusion for me, and just seeing that we innocently create our own stress, because we are born into a society of stress. We're born into a society where we're told what's good and bad and right and wrong, and whether we're good and bad and right and wrong. And so from that level, we naturally lose touch with what's innate, and we go to please the people around us mostly.
So, with the theme, obviously, this is Mental Health Week, and the theme this year is nature, which I just think is fantastic. And you've spoken to it so beautifully today. How has nature impacted on your mental health?
Oh, I think it's so much bigger than we realize, so much bigger. And to me now, whether it's someone who is struggling physically or emotionally or mentally, getting back to nature is always something that I look at. And we don't live in a world where that's always easy, but what we can do, even if we can't walk in nature every day, for example, we can start to mimic nature in an unnatural world. So there's things we can do, whether they're part of actual outside nature, if you like, that we can start to get our bodies back at least into a space where they are more used to belonging. So it's almost like our brains have evolved way quicker than our body's ability to sort of catch up. And our bodies are miraculously resilient. I mean, we don't have to even explain why, it just is. But the way that we live in closed, draft-free houses with, I didn't realize I live in quite a new build. My windows have a tint on them, which then prevent even more of the good rays coming in.
Oh, right. Goodness.
It's crazy. So, we live in these kind of hermetically sealed containers, don't we? And we're eating a lot of food that's quite dead. It doesn't really have a lot of life force to it. We're not eating a species specific diet. We're not hydrating. We're not having great sleep. For me, the fundamental basics of nature are nutrition, hydration, good sleep, exercise. Doesn't have to be crazy exercise, but the right kind of exercise for you, and reduction in toxins. And that can be whether it's EMF or whether that's pesticides, whether that's whatever that might be, and also connection with other people. And so they are the basic things that if we grow up at a different time, we would have naturally had more access to. We might have been killed by tigers, but we would have had more. We would have naturally, we'd have naturally come out of the cave into the sunlight every morning and got that full spectrum UV light in our eyes to signify the start of the day. We'd have grounded ourselves with our bare feet on the earth, having all those electrons charging our bodies all day, every day. We'd have slept on a hard surface in a cool bedroom. We wouldn't have kind of cushioned our bodies with all this softness and all this warmth and all this kind of comfort, which is lovely in so many ways, but is taking us again further away from this sort of what our bodies actually are craving. And all the social distancing and everything that we've experienced in the last year, taking our bodies further away from connection. We are primed for connection. We're wired to connect. We are, connected. And any attempt to sort of stop that creates stress in us. So for me, that understanding of nature not just about, I mean, supplements are great, but not just about taking a few supplements here and there. It's about really going before all of that and going, right, what do our bodies actually cry out for? You know, and it's not junk food, and it's not, you know, Coca-Cola, and it's not it feels like it is because that's the dopamine hit. That's what we've been conditioned and advertised and subconsciously programmed to want, but it's not what our bodies are really looking for. And I think actually this is a really key thing for me, is that we say, oh well, I'm craving Coke, I must need it. It's like, well, not really. What are you really craving? What's beneath the sugar addiction? You know, oh, I need to go shopping because it's like, what are you really looking for? In all of these things that we think are what we need, they're the instant dopamine hit. So our brain's always going to go towards those, always. But it's like, what's really going on? And that, to me, is more natural and connected to nature, to get sort of beyond those dopamine releasing activities and going, right, what is it we really, really want to nurture here? You know, if I'm craving loads of sweet foods, where is my life not sweet enough? Genuinely, what's going on? You know, and so that's again, I probably went off topic again, but it's kind of that back to nature in a way. That's what it feels like for me anyway.
Yeah. And so what I was hoping, I love that answer, and I could have gone off again on many tangents there. But I'd love to know for you, like you, that's what you've described there is a huge amount of knowledge. And I'm guessing that these are things that you yourself practice. What's been the impact for you by having this embodied knowledge of walking barefoot or going outside and looking at the natural light?
Brilliant. And that to me, it takes you out of this space of running, of stressing, of trying, overachieving, trying to tick these invisible boxes somebody's made up, right back into source, right back into essence, right back into where we come from, I suppose. And so that has been the biggest shift. It's like, you know, from that position, if you like, you can start to look at everything you're doing without being in it. Does that make sense? So you can sort of like take that step back and go, right, you know, when I'm kind of grounded, whether that's, you know, you can mentally ground yourself anytime. You don't have to have your feet on the bare soil. But, you know, when I'm grounded, when I'm feeling like just simple life, if you like, when I'm back to nature, I can then sort of, it's almost like the perspective shift to be able to look out at the world that we're living in and going, God, I can't believe how caught up I was in that train of thought about that person and what they said to me yesterday, or I can't believe how much this thing at work is really stressing me out. And now I can feel peace. I can see the difference. But the problem is we spend so much time in this, you know, kind of space, in this meerkat kind of little world, that we don't ever know how it feels not to be like that. So to me, it's that shift in perspective is enough. We don't have to change everything about our life. We don't have to quit our job or anything. We just have to see it from this renewed perspective. And from that place, that's where the creativity comes in, where the intuition comes in, where the wisdom comes in. We just allow ourselves the luxury of stepping off the wheel and being, you know, really being. And I think some of it, so many tangents with this. I could go off on so many, it's just crazy. But and I apologize.
Well, luckily, me and you were thinking of doing a course together about this very topic.
And I think there's just so much of it, which would be brilliant. Exactly. And I can't wait to do something like that with you. So, but I think it's this idea that I've totally lost my train of thought now. It's probably a good thing.
Intuition, creativity.
Yes. So we have just lost that connection. I think we're going back to what we said at the beginning, where we've lost that connection with our body. So instead of feeling, so if we've got a problem to solve or something that's going on, we tend to jump more into that space, more into that over-analysis, more into that kind of thinking we can think our way out of it, or, you know, like Googling frantically or whatever it might be, rather than, and doing much more doing. And I think this idea of being is so fundamental. And some people achieve that in meditation or breath work or walking in nature or just even taking a shower. There's all different kind of, I guess, routes back to being. But in its simplest nature, it is just being in awareness, observing what's going on. And that's the place of peace, and that's the place of being. And from that place is where the heart-centered living can come from, where the creativity can come from, that then allows us to go back into these problems, if you like, with a refreshed perspective, as opposed to just being constantly stuck in this made up whirlwind of stuff.
Doing very well not to swear.
Thanks.
So would you say that it has, you don't have, I'm guessing, I think I know the answer to this, you don't have anxiety or panic attacks anymore, or any sort of skin issues and stuff like that?
No, I don't. And I'm forever grateful for that, because I know it's not a nice place to be living in. But, you know, I can feel anxious still. Like, I think the danger of this is sometimes that we feel like we want to get away from all the feeling. And I think in a way that was my detriment when I was trying to cure my anxiety in my teens, because I thought I shouldn't feel anxious ever, you know, and obviously that's not realistic or achievable. But I don't have the anxiety that then debilitates me. I don't make it mean more than it means. And I certainly haven't experienced a panic attack for a very, very, very long time, which I'm very grateful for. But I think it just comes from, you know, panic attack is your body's way of saying, you know, I will swear now, like, stop the fuck, you know, just kind of stop this. And we think it's just meaning, like it can happen at any point, and we try and find this meaning in the physical world, but it's not really coming from there. It's just coming from an overwhelm, complete chronic overwhelm. Once we can kind of get out of that place of chronic overwhelm, the chances of it happening are a lot smaller anyway. And you know, and again, we all have our tendencies. I tend towards dry skin. So, you know, I still look after my mental and physical health in a way that makes sense to me, and because I don't want to experience those things again, so I look after myself physically and emotionally. And I have my moments. I'm human, you know. It's kind of, yeah, I still get stressed at the car cutting in front of me and all those things, but I can come down much quicker. You know, it's kind of like I kind of find myself laughing at the same time as shouting now, you know.
Yes, I do know. I do really know. Much quicker to come out of believing my stressful thinking, and also observing. Sometimes I can feel that I want to go into like, why is that person doing that to me? And then I'm like, oh God, that's interesting that showed up again, that weird thought. So yeah, that's a much nicer place to be than the however many years, I think, even from being a child in. So I really hear what you're saying, and I think I could definitely talk to you all day about this, but I'm going to have to wind it in, and I'd love for you to just tell people what you're doing now and where they can find you.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm a personal coach, so I do one-to-one coaching. I also do the odd group thing, and we're looking at doing a program together at some point, you and I. So yeah, my website is aliscottcoaching.com. I'm finally getting more on Instagram, Ali Scott Coaching.
I've been seeing your little videos around face care. I love them.
Yeah, well, I realised actually I'm interested in so many things when it comes to physical and emotional health, and people have constantly told me that I need to niche, or I need to kind of narrow my focus, and it's never felt right. And I just love all of it, so I kind of tend to deal with all of it, and I tend to see people who are either struggling emotionally or physically, and I'll often signpost them to other people if they need further work, you know, like further nutritional help, for example. But I'm just trying to get everyone back to nature, really, physically and mentally. So yeah.
I love what you said there, and this might be a conversation that you and I have off the podcast, but what you kind of alluded to is that we get told to niche down, and I'm like you, I was like, I've got, you know, like so many, so much knowledge and so much experience. We're told to niche down. It was a bit like you were saying, you know, we're told to live this sort of constricted, conditioned life, and that's what I just heard in what you're saying. That doesn't feel intuitive to you, so now you're doing everything, even on Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. And I see that a lot, like in every client, it's like they're just everywhere there's a problem area, we've just narrowed our life down to this pinhole of some kind. You know, we've kind of closed down to this small tunnel. And I think, you know, when you start to realize that that is a construct that you've been born into, that it's not even yours actually, and you start to questioning, you know, you can start to maybe break the walls down a little bit and see glimmers of light, and you're like, oh, there's more options. Wow, cool. I don't have to believe this about myself. I don't have to believe this about the world. I can maybe look, you know, tread a different path. which is a challenge because we're used to treading certain paths in our brain, but it's the most rewarding challenge, essentially.
And I think circling back to the beginning, you know, that takes courage to listen to that intuition and speak your truth. So I thank you for doing that today, and I've really enjoyed listening to you, and thank you so much. And we will be in touch with everyone who's listening about our upcoming in-depth more exploration. But for now, thank you so much, Ali. It's been a real pleasure.
Ditto. Thank you, darling.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye.